It's the end of the day with Ray. Hello, my friends. Hey, today I want to talk about private equity and the OEMs within the print sector. You know, ladies and gentlemen, when we think about private equity in the print sector, we think about those folks that bought up all these dealers, built these mega dealerships, and then they're going to sell them off to somebody. Over the last few years, we haven't seen any real sell-offs. We saw one. I'll talk about them in a minute. But for the most part, private equity is sitting on some, investments. And they're going to have to make some decisions with those investments. Private equity also has ownership in some of our OEM friends. And they too are going to have to decide what to do with those investments. I personally believe that some of the private equity is going to buy more interest in OEMs. And maybe it's going to take activist investors to shake shit up in that space. Remember Carl Icahn and what he did over at Xerox just a few short years ago. Folks, a lot of people didn't like what Carl was doing. Even though I don't consider Xerox an OEM, we have to all admit they've done some pretty bold things over the last few years. Will it take another activist investor to shake things up? Is Carl himself done shaking things up inside the print sector? So let's jump on my Sharp Interactive board. I want to show you something here, folks. So the first thing I want to do is I want to circle this thing, private equity. I do love my Sharp Interactive board. See, I can do things right from my computer, do my circling, if you will. So ladies and gentlemen, when you think about private equity, think about the customers of the companies they invest in. And when the customers are knocking down the door and they want to buy those products and services, well, the investment community thinks, wow, we got to invest in this industry. Customers love this stuff. We could throw a bunch of money at this and help grow them, help redefine some of the things they're doing. It's an optimistic approach. It's all about growth. It's all about a happy, vibrant customer. But then, folks, if you go to the other side of my screen, we got some industries where the customers are saying goodbye to the industry. I'm not saying they're saying goodbye to printers altogether. I'm just saying they're saying goodbye to the glory days of print. We all must admit that, right? They're going to buy smaller machines, A4 machines. They're going to print less stuff. They're going to print less tomorrow than they do today. All the things I've been talking about the last 5 years. Well, most people in the world believe that stuff now. They believe it. And so if the investors are starting to believe that themselves, don't they now have to take a pragmatic approach to the investment? Some investors will go into this with a pragmatic approach. But what about the investors that went into it with that optimistic approach? Are they going to now change to a pragmatic approach? And when I say pragmatic, I mean they're going to base it off of realities. I've used this term a lot lately in the last couple of weeks, but this is the pragmatic approach to private equity inside the print space. They're going to milk the cow until there's no more milk. That is a business strategy. It's ruthless sometimes. There's some financial engineering that has to go on. It's on a but see, these investors, these activist investors, they don't have emotions around this. They care about the entity. And sometimes that entity might need to be deconstructed in order to have constructive profits. I want to say that again. Sometimes industries need to be deconstructed so they can have a constructive profit, especially industries that have been disrupted or industries where their very relevance is at stake because their users aren't using their product or their service, or they don't need it as much as they used to, which basically defines the print industry. So will the activist investors be able to do the deconstructing needed? Because it appears the OEMs might not be able to do it. Maybe they're too emotional. So ladies and gentlemen, you know, our industries, definitely the investment community, they can't have this plausible hope anymore the way they did before this pandemic. Even if they knew that print was declining and their hope was that the great relations the print sector had with their customers would enable them to sell other stuff in those offices. It's not worked out. I think one of the biggest fantasies in the entire document imaging channel is that. We hear consultants, they'll tell software manufacturers or ancillary products that aren't print but could easily fit in one's mind to be sold in the print channel. I mean, it does a lot of this stuff fits in a logical mind. Oh man, they got great relationships. They can sell our products. All we need to do is find a consultant that knows everybody. And that consultant could get our products, get all these dealers to sell our products. They've been trying this for over 20 years. Hasn't really worked. We're still known as the print services company that dabbles in some other stuff, but never really any home runs, even in IT. And we need to have some home runs if that strategy is going to really pan out. There's a few of our mega dealer friends that have done it well. I talk about Marco every once in a while as an example. There's probably others out there. But for the most part, we're still a print industry trying to survive as we try to diversify, but we're struggling at the diversification. So let me pull up this slide. Let's talk about some of these investors. So, we know Carl Icahn, activist investor, 20% stake in Xerox, made some bold moves over the last couple of years. Xerox doing some interesting things. We'll see how those things pan out, but at least they're making some decisions. And are those decisions being made because Carl Icahn and John Vicentin are strategic leaders that are able to deconstruct? Because if you can't deconstruct, how are you ever going to construct what needs to be replaced? You have to tear the old building down if there's nowhere to build and you want a new building, right? Folks, we got to be able to deconstruct, and I don't think we can do it. Activist investors. There's a guy named, let me say this right, Murakami. And Murakami works with Epsimo Capital in Japan, private equity group. He's definitely an activist investor. He currently has a 19% stake in Ricoh. He also has a 9.9% stake in Toshiba. And he is an activist investor. And could Ipsimo Capital sit in the boardroom of Ricoh and help them make some decisions with a 19% stake? I assure you, they could. Could a strategy be, hey, Toshiba, we got a 9.9% stake in the conglomerate. We think you should spin off Toshiba Tech to Ricoh. Or could they do it the other way? Could they say, we have a 9.9% stake in Toshiba conglomerate, which owns Toshiba Tech. We want Toshiba Tech to go buy Ricoh. And if they do that, would they take a pragmatic approach and milk that big cow until there's no more milk? Could be a real strategy. Could be a real strategy. Think about our friends over at Lexmark. They're owned by PAG, private equity group. Got a big stake in that. The other thing to think about with that stake is they did that back in 2016. Private equity doesn't like to keep things a long time. They want to go public. That's the heyday. Let's make this thing go public, build it up, clean it all up, get a nice EBITDA, take it public, get a 10 times or 15 times EBITDA, everybody gets rich. Well, we're talking about the print sector. The other option is, let's sell it to another private equity. One private equity to the other private equity. If the decision of the investment is based on hope, plausible outcomes, with growth, maybe another private equity can come in there and take them out. But again, we're talking about print, a declining, disrupted marketplace. What will PAG do with that ownership? Will they sell it all to Nine Star and Nine Star owns Lexmark 100%? Will they call up Ipsimo Capital and say, hey, work with us. We want to play. Ladies and gentlemen, a lot of people will say, well, the Japanese marketplace, it's different from here and private equity can't go buy up these iconic Japanese companies. Well, I beg to differ. And I realize that CVC, the British private equity firm, tried to take the whole Toshiba conglomerate. Didn't work out. But at the end of the day, they were able to, a private equity group Bain Capital was able to buy Toshiba's chip business. Remember that? So it can be done. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of money in private equity in Japan. Read about it. They're sitting on stockpiles of cash. They look at the print OEMs. Is that a place where they could go in and deconstruct some things so they could construct some profitability out of it? with a pragmatic approach to the marketplace, a marketplace in decline. Folks, you know, I want to ask everybody a question over here about these resellers. So we know our reseller friends, and I picked 3 of them. And these 3, I've talked about them before. And the reason I'm highlighting them here is because the private equities that own these groups are the biggest private equities in my mind in our space, buying up dealers. And I want to ask everybody about Sycamore Partners and Dex Imaging. So we knew that Dex Imaging, that was a strategic sale, and that was probably, in my opinion, one of the greatest home runs in our industry. You know, I don't know the details of it, but I assure you that the Doyles did pretty well selling to Sycamore Partners because that was a strategic acquisition. It was out of the box. It was different. Caught a lot of people off guard, except for me. But at the end of the day, that was an interesting play. So here's my question. Do you think Sycamore Partners would buy Dex Imaging in February of 2022 instead of February of 2019? Do you think the pandemic would have changed their thinking? I do. And if anybody else thinks that way too, that means that the private equity group right now is going into the pragmatic approach. And the pragmatic approach could be to milk the cow until there's no more milk. The other thing that we can do in the industry, private equity groups, is to finally put some other products and services in those accounts and start building up new revenue bases for a continued relevance. But in order for that to happen, there has to be deconstruction, folks. There has to be. Investors get excited about the hope. I mean, do you all remember, and I've talked about this before, I just want to show you this chart real quick, but this chart is Ricoh's stock price, and you see this peak up here? That's when they said, we're looking past print. Investors got excited about that. Ifsimo Capital got excited about that. Wow, this is great. But look where we are today. It can't be just talk. It has to be strong, bold leadership. You can't walk back your aspirations when your aspirations were right. The worst thing that Rico did, and I'm going to beat him up over this probably as long as the end of the day with Ray's on the air, but the worst thing they did during this time was to walk back that conversation. They were spot on with it, and they walked it back. They had to go appease a channel of a lot of delusional people and convince them that everything will be okay. We still care about print. And it's through mindsets. It's through bold leadership that deconstruction happens. You can't walk back what you know is right. And they should have held strong to that. And they should have convinced their dealers and their partners that this is the right strategy and we're going to help you through that strategy. Those dealers would have still bought their print equipment. This is the fantasy. We're not going to stop selling print equipment when people are buying it. We just got to be prepared for the day they don't buy it anymore, or we got to be prepared right now for when they do buy stuff, it's decreased in revenue and it's decreased in profit. It's not helping us grow our business. So shame on you, Rico, for walking that back. You should have never done it. Ladies and gentlemen, one thing's for sure. We got to have some change inside the space. And I believe that activists like Carl Icahn and Murakami can make those tough decisions. They can help the OEMs deconstruct so that we can construct something better and vibrant for our future. A lot to think about in today's video, but I want everybody to think about what I said over here about Dex. And maybe that'll help us think a little clearer. Sycamore Partners write the big check in just a little over a month from now, like they did back in 2019. I don't think they would. And if they did, they would have had a different strategy. Maybe it's time we play the right strategy. Maybe it's time we think about what Rico said just less than a year ago, because they were right. Before I close, I want to ask everybody a question. This will kind of help you think about this even more. Konica Minolta will talk a lot about their diversifications. They brag about them. Knocking it out of the park with IT, all the things that I've been talking about for the last couple of years with them. Let me ask you a question, Konica Minolta. And this is for the leadership, and it's not being mean to you. Just answer the question. If one of your branch managers called you up in your direct operations and said, Konica, hey, we are killing it with IT services. We're kicking butt. We're knocking it out of the park. We're making so much money and so much profit off of our IT deliverable. Our reps are killing it with IT services. Print is a distraction that's in our way in this office. We want to stop selling print, and we want to focus on 100% IT services. Or don't beat us up about print anymore because we're killing it with IT. Will you leave us alone on print? What do you think would happen to that branch manager? Well, he'd get fired probably. He wouldn't even ask the question. Because the sad reality is disruption, deconstruction never really happens from within. It usually takes outsiders that'll come in with the wrecking ball and do what has to be done. It's just the reality. That's why industries are in fact disrupted, and that's why they go obsolete. The challenge to all of my friends at the Document Imaging Channel is this. Let's deconstruct what's not relevant and figure out a way that we're going to capitalize on those great relationships, and it's a lot more than just talk. And all those people that are trying to sell products and services into that space, maybe you need to start thinking about different approaches. Because banking on some great relationship probably isn't going to work. Because it hasn't worked for the last decade plus. A lot to think about in today's video, but everybody watching me knows this. Status quo is the killer of all that'll be invented. Don't get stuck in status quo, and I'll see you all tomorrow.